Firewalls are one of the most foundational components that help protect our computer's security. Firewalls block network traffic based on rules. So firewalls can detect malicious activity, stop that activity from happening. Like by default, your computer will allow you to send traffic out to the internet. And if you request that information, the firewall will let that information come back. Like if I request a web page, the firewall is going to let me load the contents of that web page. But somebody out from the internet can't originate a connection by default. Instead, I have to allow that traffic through the firewall. So generally speaking, there are two kinds of firewalls. One of the type of firewall is a network firewall. So here we have the internet, we've got a firewall, then we've got like our home network, for example. Sometimes the firewall is running on the router, or it can be a separate device. That firewall is going to block packets from coming into our network. Even the cheapest Wi-Fi routers that you buy at Walmart, they're going to have a firewall that can be turned on. And it's going to work decently well. Not super sophisticated, but it can work. We can also install firewalls on every single individual device. So a firewall installed on one device that's only protecting one device is a host-based firewall. So back in the day, early versions of Windows did not come with firewalls by default. You had to go download a firewall manually and install it, and that just wasn't something that a lot of people were going to do. Eventually, Microsoft, in its Windows XP Service Pack 2, Microsoft was taking a lot of heat for security, so they said, okay, Service Pack 2, we are going to deploy a firewall as part of Windows for the first time. And ever since then, every version of Windows comes with a standard firewall that people can use. Companies can choose to keep that firewall or install a separate one, but every Windows device has a firewall. So these block packets. So let's go ahead and take a look at the firewall running on our Windows Server virtual machine. In the Start menu, I'm just going to search for Firewall. And here's one thing that's kind of annoying. We've got several options. There's Firewall and Network Protection in the system settings. Then we have Windows Defender Firewall with Advanced Security. And we've got the Windows Defender Firewall. Let's just go ahead and launch the regular Windows Defender Firewall and take a look at it. So we see that it is running. So if it's running, you'll see these green shields here. Our computer's analyzing packets both on the private network and the public network connected to the internet. So all that's good. This is in a good state. And is my network working? So if I open up a new tab and I go to, what's a good sample website? neverssl.com. I could get out to the internet just fine. The firewall allowed this to come back. I'm protected. But if other people were just trying to send me packets out of the blue, my firewall is going to say, I don't know what you're talking about. So I'm going to close that tab. So I'm connected to the internet, my firewall's on, everything's working. So this is good. Let's take a look. We're going to click the Advanced Settings link. And here's where we see that Advanced Security. And we can check the rules. What traffic is allowed in and what traffic is allowed out. Now, there's a whole lot of rules here, and typically you don't want to change them unless you've got a good reason to. I've got Google Chrome installed, so Google Chrome, when I installed it, it put some rules in there to make sure that Google Chrome was going to work correctly. The remote desktop protocol has been allowed, so that traffic can come in. So if I scroll down the list a little bit, I'll see I've got the remote desktop. So we're allowing packets in from the internet. That's how we establish a connection to this server. If we turn these off in the firewall, we would not be able to connect to the server because the firewall would block those connection attempts. So I want to try something. What I'm going to do is I'm going to not minimize this, but I'm going to shrink it down a little bit. So I can see my server on the internet here in this window, and I'm going to right click on my start menu and I'm going to open Windows PowerShell. And I'm going to shrink this down a little bit because I want to see these kind of side by side, kind of top to bottom. Because I want to see, can I ping my Windows server? When we set up the security groups for this Windows server, we set a rule. We said, okay, allow the ICMP IPv4 in. So that allows pings. Can I ping my server? I'm going to try to ping my server's public IPv4 address. Let's take a look. Ping 54.89.109.10. So in the Amazon Web Services service, security groups, they're firewall rules. So those Amazon is running a firewall at the network level. And these pings are failing. Why are they failing? I told Amazon, hey, open up the network firewall to allow these kind of pings. But when I try to ping my virtual machine, there's no response. Those pings are blocked. Well, it's not Amazon blocking them. We opened up that rule with the security groups at the network level, but by default, this Windows server blocks ping requests. So we're actually going to change a firewall rule here. So I'm going to embiggen this window so I can see my firewall rules. We saw that the ping failed. That's to be expected at this point. We've got to find a specific rule. And the rule is file. I want to make sure I read this carefully. File and printer sharing echo requests. And I'm going to expand this just so I can read it a little bit better. So we've got file and printer sharing echo requests, ICMP v4 in and IPv6 in. Well, I'm just using IPv4 right now to ping this computer, so I don't care about the IPv6 rule. I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to click enable rule. So this rule says allow the traffic. If that rule is not enabled, the traffic will not be allowed. The default is to deny all traffic unless it's allowed. So I'm going to enable that rule and let's see. Fingers crossed. Now I've enabled my host firewall on this Windows server to allow incoming ping requests. And this should work. I'm going to come over to PowerShell on my host computer. So in my home network right now, I'm working from home. I'm going to hit the up arrow key because I'm lazy and I don't want to retype that IP address. I'm going to hit enter. Fingers crossed this works. Okay, good. I get a reply. So I had to first, when I created the security group for this server, I allowed the pings. That was at Amazon's network level. I also had to change the inbound rules on the host firewall running on the Windows server to also allow those pings. Once I enabled that rule, I was able to, from my computer outside of Amazon's data center, initiate a request to my Windows server, and then it could respond to those pings. So that's good. The firewall is working as intended. I'm going to keep that turned on just because sometimes it's useful to be able to ping your server just to make sure your connection is working correctly. If I right-clicked on that rule again and I chose disable rule, nobody would be able to ping this computer. It would just not respond. It would look like it was not connected to the network. But I'm going to leave it enabled just because. So can people bypass the firewall? So firewalls protect us. But if I open up a new tab and I go to my email and somebody sends me a malicious email that's got a attachment that has malware, will my firewall block that email attachment? The answer is no, because from the firewall's point of view, I'm just browsing a website, like using Gmail from my web browser, and I'm asking for that information. So by default, my web browser is allowed to request information, and the firewall is going to let that response come back. So firewalls aren't a magic bullet to protect our computers. They're really for protecting the network connections. We need other tools that are going to make sure that I'm not downloading and running malware on my machine. Now, there are some more sophisticated network firewalls, and there's email scanning. There's lots of different tools that can solve that problem. But this network firewall, this Windows Defender, my host firewall here, would still let me download malicious programs and run them on my computer. So it's not a silver bullet, but it is an important piece of what helps protect our computers.